we now need to work harder to make those business cases work. Having said that, exactly because we have entered this phase of, not just starting out, the rewards are also bigger.
Hey, I'm Martin Griffiths and welcome to Manufacturers Make Strides, the podcast where we explore the world of manufacturing. And today we're diving into one of the most pressing and transformative topics in manufacturing at the moment, and that's sustainability. So joining me is Eszter Haberl, who's a sustainability director at Tenneco, and she's got over 15 years of experience in manufacturing and sustainability. Esther's journey has taken her from working with OEMs at the start of her career on customization to supply chain management and now to a leadership role in sustainability. It's something that she's passionate about and that she's helping businesses decarbonize in difficult areas and really drive meaningful change that she's passionate about from an early age when she was involved in some recycling initiatives and competitions. So we'll uncover how manufacturers can simplify their sustainability processes, embed it into their manufacturing processes, and then measure its real impact, revenue, and prove how sustainability can be on that quarterly profit statement. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in manufacturing, this episode will leave you inspired and equipped with practical insights to make sustainability a reality in your workplace. So let's get straight into it now with Esther. Hey Esther, good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much, Martin. Great to be here.
So we've got a lot to get into today. You've got kind of a vast amount of experience, a lot of expertise in sustainability. So we'll get to that in time. But I just wanted to start off with wondering if there was a moment growing up in your kind of early days that made you curious about how things are made or how problems are solved.
Yes, certainly. There's been many points throughout my childhood where I've had this. And I have been one of those who really enjoyed taking things apart. My dad is actually an electric engineer. And so he's also shown me a few things, of course, with supervision. I was better at taking things apart rather than assembling them. But I had a lot of fun.
So you took them apart and Dad put them back together in those early days. Yeah, that's fair. Do you remember the first time maybe that you felt that like you'd made an impact, whether that was kind of creating something or solving a problem or working on a project? And how did that feel?
In terms of throughout my career, or are we still looking at
Maybe in those early days, yeah. Maybe pick a couple. Maybe in those early days when you realised, that maybe led onto the path. You maybe started you off on the road that you've now subsequently followed.
There's certainly been a lot of projects, even at school. If I think back, elements around recycling and elements like that, where we've made a little bit of a competition out of it, and that's just seeing how much value that creates. I think that has certainly been an early element, and then growing up, I guess, seeing how much the need has grown for these, that has definitely shaped where I've ended up.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So that kind of passion for recycling and looking out after the environment, that started quite early for you then, did it?
Yes, absolutely.
So what sparked that interest then early on?
I'd say that in terms of sustainability and how I've gotten into sustainability, it's always been a personal interest of mine. Of course, everyone's concerned about the environment. Everyone's concerned about what's going on. But more specifically, from a corporate level, I would say that things have changed for me when I've realized that sustainability, rather than just being a cost driver, can also be a profit driver. Because in the beginning, prior to that, I'd say that having worked in manufacturing for about 15 years, uh, it's very much an environment where we're focused on and incentivized on focusing on quarter to quarter financial results. And for me, it's always been a challenge to see, how does sustainability fit into that? How does a whole new set of KPIs on top of financial KPIs fit into that? And I think the moment when I've realized that actually the two can enhance one another, and actually there are elements and there are actions that can be taken with sustainability to make sure that the one costs are minimized in terms of efficiencies that are realized through sustainability, and two, it can open up new revenue streams as well. So I've come from a commercial background as opposed to some other background, and I think that's what I'm bringing to sustainability.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So you've led us on quite nicely to my next question. So definitely, well, you raised a couple of things there that were potentially really interesting. How does sustainability fit into the quarterly financial results and the prospect of sustainability maybe being an additional revenue stream? But you mentioned, I'd just like to explore your career journey a little further, because you've taken quite an interesting path and route. So I was just wondering if you could just walk us through your career journey so far. What initially drew you into manufacturing? Can you just tell us how your path has evolved over the years?
Absolutely. So, having done business school at Warwick, I then followed into the automotive industry as that's a university that gets a lot of recruitment from automotive, of course. And I've started out on the OEM side with the BMW Group. And more specifically with Rolls Royce. That has been very interesting in terms of the challenge of working in the what's called bespoke department, which is all about the personalization of the cars. And my focus has been to look at the again, the business case and the commercial side of things, and really taking the individual customers' vision and turning it into reality. Now, of course, in terms of a manufacturing point of view, that's a unique challenge, because taking something that's otherwise a straight line manufacturing and then making all sorts of different changes and really making sure that a unique feature of a certain vehicle is developed for just one unit is of course something that's been always quite puzzling, but very rewarding. And I think also in terms of the margins that are realized there, while there's never been any blueprint, because every new project would be a new way of having to approach things. But then, of course, there's very healthy margins in that. And then I've moved on to after Rolls Royce, I've moved on to the tier one manufacturer, large corporation, Madison, and that's where I've been working on innovations, and again the commercial side of innovations, making sure that the group innovation agenda is in line with maximizing profits and is indeed, we're working on the things that will be required in the future. And to do that, of course, I work together closely with our customers, all major OEMs around the world. And what we've seen was that more and more the questions around what to innovate around and what kind of problems to solve has been all around sustainability. And over 95% of what our OEMs have been asking for has been, how do we reduce the carbon footprint of this part? How do we reduce waste here? How do we increase recyclability? How do we make this better? And that's when I've moved on to full-time sustainability. And that was about 4 years ago, when seeing that real market demand for it and seeing how much the there's a not just a need for it, but there's also a very strong pull that in order to remain competitive, we need to ensure that we are decarbonizing, and we're decarbonizing in a cost competitive way as well. Because I think that's certainly being that moving on to what I'm doing currently, which is also with a tier one manufacturer, similarly large organization, very global. It's looking at how to again make the business case work, and I think sustainability as a whole has moved on to a more mature phase. I would say that if we look at not just in automotive, but as a wider element, the baseline for decarbonization is usually 2019. And then the end number would be 2040, or for some companies, if we look at that, the 2025, which is where we are now, that's quarter way through. And that means for sustainability, the honeymoon period is over. There are so much more challenges. All of those, we see this in a lot of companies actually track back or scale back on their previous commitments because the reality has hit them, and they see that rather than these grand ambitions, things are hard. There are all sorts of different factors, and it's a complex landscape. So it's now recalibrating those, and I think that's where it's so crucial that it's now all about making sure that companies are competitive in the long run, but also competitive in a way that the companies that are rising to the top are the ones that find a way to decarbonize in the most cost competitive way.
So you mentioned that we're over the honeymoon period with sustainability, which is a nice way to phrase it. And you think there are some challenges that are kind of coming up to some difficult challenges. So could you just kind of elaborate on some of those? What do you think some of the biggest challenges are when manufacturers are trying to implement sustainable business practices?
Yeah, so I think overall, when I mean the honeymoon is over, is elements like, for example, in the automotive industry, we've had more recently the EV purchasing subsidies having been scrapped, and governments are no longer supporting those as much as they used to. All of these different perks that were there is no more, and what that means is that rather than that initial takeoff, we now need to work harder to make those business cases work. Having said that, exactly because we have entered this phase of, not just starting out, the rewards are also bigger. So if we're then looking at, again, within automotive, if we're looking at how much the regulation has increased even just in the past years, and how much it is increasing from a financial point of view in the years to come, then we're really looking at serious financial implications. And that is just, again, to give you an example, Tesla for the first 9 months of last year has been looking at credit through tolling or within Europe, within, like, globally, over $2 billion US. And there's actually a lot of these elements of opportunities where, especially within Europe, there is, for example, energy saving certificates, in that the energy companies have to realize certain savings. If they have not been able to do their decarbonization to the extent that they should have, then they're looking to buy those certificates. Manufacturers can be in a position to sell those and look at things like replacing heat pumps or whether heating systems or cooling systems, that by upgrading them, making them more efficient, making them more less carbon intensive, as a result, those savings that can be calculated can be sold to the energy providers, and then for certificates, and that can then be used to finance the capex and, in cases, OPEX as well, that needs to be invested to realize these savings. So it's elements like these where the financial implications have certainly heightened, and will be even more so in the next coming years. Even elements like the CBAM carbon border adjustment mechanism, and how the company I work for example, happens to have a lot of steel in our parts, and making those calculations around year on year how that's increasing with anything that's imported into the EU from outside of the EU, then we're looking at those costs really ramping up. So making sure that that sustainability is now no longer just something that's a nice to put in our sustainability report at the end of the year that we publish. It's really something that can chip away at profitability, but equally the other side of the same coin is it can bring in great opportunities.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions just following up on that then. So if the overall goal, so you've mentioned a couple of times that you think sustainability needs a solid business case, basically, to be fully adopted and realized. But does this seemingly quite complex set of factors influencing it, incentives here and there, credits, potential revenue streams, seems to me that could be quite complicated, although it could be quite a complicated business case. How do you make sense of that then? How do you make a simple business case with all of these potentially very complicated factors going on?
You're absolutely right. It is quite complex, and also because it's all new in a sense, it is something that can get a little overwhelming. And my way of tackling that is really to ensure that there's a full cross-functional collaboration within the company, and outside of it as well. But as a first step, I would say that ensuring that there are multiple different functions fully involved with it is a key unlock to this, because when we're looking at elements like switching to renewable energy, or looking at contracts that are, quite frankly, it could be 10 years of looking to see how to make a business case work, it's something where we need to make sure that our sales department is fully involved with, so they can explain to us what are the additional commercial benefits that can be realized. What kind of business are we at risk of not meeting their expectations, or could be losing out on if we weren't upgrading. Making sure that so those numbers come together from the sales department, from program managers in manufacturing. Then we've got also make sure that operations is fully involved, that even maintenance from a technical point of view, when we're looking at all sorts of CapEx, OPEX, making sure that they're on board, making sure that purchasing, of course, is a huge element, looking at scope 3 and how for most manufacturers, the majority of the emissions will be coming from further up the chain, and therefore ensuring that the systems that are helping making the purchasing decisions, procurement decisions, are in line with those sustainability KPIs, so that's not missed. And So it's all of these different departments, come with finance, of course, all over legal. So it's working cross-functionally is a key unlock. And then I think another key unlock is also then not just working cross-functionally within the company, but outside of the company, and making sure that, because again, it's doing something the way it hasn't been done before. In order to de-risk, we need to work with our customers. We need to work with our suppliers on a whole different level than what the automotive industry has been used to before.
Okay. So just going back to internally kind of first, how do you think you get those kind of disparate teams, engineering, operations, sales, purchasing, how do you get them all aligned on sustainability goals? Because traditionally they weren't really, and these are potentially quite new goals and new strategies. So what do you think some good techniques for that are?
It does require a top-down approach in my experience, and getting a buy-in from top management is crucial to this, and them understanding what is at stake. And again, this is where putting it into numbers in terms of what additional revenues could we be looking at, what type of fines would we be looking at if we don't meet these. That's where getting that top management buy-in is crucial. And then once that's done, still working with the separate departments, ensuring that they fully understand. I think a level of education is still to some extent required, although more and more people are getting more aware of these issues. But and I've certainly seen this in the past 4 or 5 years, where now a lot of people outside of sustainability have, thankfully, a good understanding of it. But making sure that everyone understands what's at stake is, I think, what really brings it together.
So if you're enjoying this episode, please give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That would help us to keep bringing authentic manufacturing conversations with the people who are shaping our industry. Thank you. You've mentioned a couple of times, you've dropped a teaser a couple of times that you think that there's potentially sources of additional revenue from sustainability strategies. So I'm going to kind of merge that with another question. So what do you think? So a company leadership down has set the direction. Let's take a scenario. They've set some sustainability goals cross-departmentally. What do you think the best way is to measure the impact of those sustainability practices? And maybe linking into that, if additional revenue is part of that, where do you think that can be potentially be coming from?
So yes, measurement is absolutely key. And what I have found was simplifying measurement is then even more of a priority, because there's so many KPIs that I see that really get things modeled up. I think if we just boil it down to the top KPIs. So when it comes to actual own operations, so decarbonizing our own operations, really focusing in on energy intensity and emissions intensity, and then looking at water and waste. But then also outside of this, and really being aware of scope 3, is where we then have to again be very ruthless about how we prioritize. And interestingly, I think that most manufacturing environment, if we just look at the top 3 components and the top 3 levers, those can actually then mean usually an 80% reduction or thereabouts. So what I mean by this, just to put it into context, if we're looking at components with, say, steel and aluminum, and maybe a bit of polymer, for steel, aluminum, iron, we're really looking at the top levers of has that aluminum or still being produced in an electric arc furnace rather than your regular furnaces? Has renewable energy being used during the production of it? Even just these two elements together with then looking at some polymer components. Again, what is the percentage of recycled content in it? Is there a level of green steel in it? Where has this been produced? Has it been produced in a country that is predominantly powered by coal, or is that produced in a country which has a higher percentage of renewable energy coming from the grid as it is? And these are the top levers that even just asking these questions from the suppliers can already put us into an understanding that this is what we're really getting. It's then, it could then mean that part is 80% less in terms of the overall product carbon footprint. And then we're in a position where we can then go, okay, I can get that from supplier A or B or C. And then at what cost are they providing that at? Equally, I think another element is that even when it comes to our own part designs, having a product carbon footprint model that is dynamic is very important, because then we can start playing around with, what if I did this scenario versus what if I did that scenario? What kind of carbon reduction is that going to get me? And then what kind of cost would that mean? And then in that sense, again, we can bring it back to the commercials and look at what's the return on investment in terms of the cost benefit on reduction of carbon and cost overall.
Okay, got you. Okay, that's really interesting. So I think what I'm just going to see if I understood this right. So I think you were saying that you would suggest the top KPIs, maybe a company's emissions, the energy use or the source of energy, and the waste generated. And if they were going to set creating a strategy with targets, a sensible way would be to set some kind of percentage improvements over time. From where you are today, we want to see a percentage improvement by, end of the year, for example. Is that kind of what you meant there? Yeah. Okay,
yes,
great.
That's absolutely right. And then there are elements that can be the sort of quick wins, and that's when, rather than just looking at overall emissions, then even just energy intensity would be the very first step, and really looking at the very basics. Of course, it then depends on how mature the manufacturer in question is in terms of decarbonisation, but just in the very beginning, such basic things can be done around energy intensity. So, whatever part comes out at the end of the line, how much energy was required to produce this. And that's where even just very basic things like that come out once we start tracking these, like so many machinery that is left on standby, I would have thought that that's probably then consuming maybe 20% of what it would be consuming when it's fully on. Whereas it turns out in many scenarios, machinery left on standby can actually consume up to 50-60% of when it's on. And so that's a lot of saving that, just powering things off when it's the weekend, when it's shut down, can really make a big difference. Elements like occupancy sensors, pod sensors, air compressors, making sure that there's no leaks, making sure that there's a heat recovery. All of these elements where really then KPIs can then start to show efficiencies and that, or drive these efficiencies, and then also making sure that it's then a win-win, both on the lower energy usage, then translating to lower cost and cash helps cash flow.
Okay, that sounds good. So how do you go about collecting this information and tracking it? Is that potentially quite a big endeavor, task to do that?
Not necessarily. There's ways to start out in, again, just a quick win way, just looking at, the energy, water and waste. All of these will come with bills. Just looking at all of those in a very simplified way can be the start. And then it can then get step by step more and more sophisticated with even things like data loggers in terms of moving it around different machinery. That can be done and doesn't cost much. We're looking at a few £100 per data logger that can already start building up a really good image in terms of where those hotspots are, where are the elements that are easiest to be saving on, and with manufacturing practices like continuous improvement, etc., that can really be put to this. And then, of course, we can
this
then
as
get
a goal in mind for that improvement.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And then it then comes down to then further refining it as throughout the years as the organization matures.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds like a really good starting point. That is. Tell me a little about what you think are potential additional revenue streams from sustainability initiatives.
Yeah, so that's mainly coming from. So I've already touched on elements that are regulation driven, that are really coming from the carbon credits, and so on. But also an additional element is making sure that the company as a whole and the manufacturer remains competitive. And I think that's where the additional revenue streams can really come from the fact that, are we better than our competition at providing a solution that is helping everyone in their decarbonization target? I've been looking at, as a tier one manufacturer of automotive parts, what we're seeing is that the OEMs are under so much pressure to decarbonize, and again are looking at, just looking at the numbers. In fact, this morning, the FT came out with a piece on how Volkswagen, if it's not decarbonizing as fast as it should be, is actually looking at EU fines of 6 billion for the period between 2023 and 2025. That is a major financial incentive for decarbonization. So any supplier supplying one of the largest car groups that is offering solutions around how to decarbonize is tapping into a massive potential and is going to be picked over ones that aren't doing that. Of course, keeping costs in mind, keeping everything in mind. So it's all about making sure that the lower carbon solutions are offered in a cost competitive way.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. And yeah, if you can be cost competitive and you can have the data to back it up, your commitments about sustainability, you think that's going to push you to the front of the selection with those OEMs. Yeah, there's going to be that big incentive. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. That really makes sense. So I just wanted to drill a little bit more into the problem and why this is happening, and why are the targets there, and what happens if we don't meet the targets? What do you think happens if we don't focus on sustainability?
So due to the regulations, it then comes down to being hit with more and more fines and taxation. I guess that's also a form of fines. And so it's looking at the of course, the wider picture as well, and the climate issues overall that we are facing, and the volatility that comes with that, not mitigating those is again a key element. I think I've talked a lot about the regulators as a push, and also customers, but on top of that, there's in addition the lenders, the investors. So making sure that a company gets access to the right capital, and not just access, but at a competitive rate. That's where it's then so important to ensure that the company has a roadmap to decarbonization and is meeting those goals, because not meeting those and then not having even a recalibration then can lead to questions around, does this company have a sustainable future? And of course, when it then comes to financial institutions, they are looking at the longer run. So that's where, again, it comes down to competitiveness.
So you think there'll be a point, possibly in the near future, where if any business doesn't have a sustainability plan, they don't really have their access to clients, to funding, will be very limited, basically.
Yes, that's absolutely it. And I think that's, again, if we're looking at the overall timelines for a lot of companies that have looked at the end of net zero being 2040, we're a quarter way through. And then on top of that, 2030 will be coming around very soon, especially in manufacturing, where, when it comes to the automotive, we're looking at programs that are always, 6-8 years long. So right now, what we are making plans for, it's definitely already going to be hitting that 2030 mark, which is the midpoint. And so in many ways, if we're not achieving, and companies not achieving a 30% reduction a 50% reduction by 2030, will be brought into question around their ability to be executing on a roadmap.
So I just wanted to switch now into a fun little feature called Myths or Truths. So I'm going to give you some kind of short statements. I'd just like your opinion, whether you think it's a myth or it's true, and maybe just tell me why you think it's a myth or it's a truth. So first one, sustainability is only for large corporations.
I like this. This is a fun game. I would say no. That's a myth. There's so much small organizations can do, just down to their agility as well, to be able to make change quicker, not being bogged down by all of the challenges that come with a large organization. Being a quicker mover, being able to implement innovations faster is, I think, a key element. And then a second part of that, I appreciate you might want to, this is more of a quick fire one, but just as a second element, I would also say that with the rise of AI and how much AI is put to decarbonization challenges, looking at identifying the decarbonization levers, looking at making systems more efficient, etc. That is then available to smaller companies as well. All of a sudden, you don't need a huge department with lots of people working on this issue. You could be looking at quick wins and efficiencies realized through these tools.
Yeah. So smaller companies can focus on quick wins, use things like AI to identify the strategy. You can do a small project quickly and get quick wins. Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Sounds great. Okay, next one. Going green, being sustainable, it always costs more.
And that I say is also a myth because, yes, it can require upfront investment, but it can then also bring in the savings and additional revenues. So I'd say that those who do it the smart way will find that it's a myth. Yeah.
That adding in sustainability practices will slow down production in a manufacturing business.
I think that's a myth as well, because certainly when things are adjusted, that requires that additional look into them, additional maintenance, additional elements. But the manufacturing process as a whole, by being more efficient, being leaner, should, in my mind, then be bringing a certain saving in terms of the time as well.
Mm, mm. And again, you mentioned before, there could be some really quick, easy wins like switching off over the weekend that shouldn't make any difference, at all. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, next one. Consumers are willing to pay more for sustainably manufactured products.
That is a real question, because
yeah, it's a difficult one. Yeah.
It's a really difficult one, because I would say that in so many ways, we see more premium brands really working on the sustainability angle, and there's definitely a correlation between, more premium, higher quality, and more sustainable. Having said that, there's also, if we're looking, we can't ignore the fact that if we're looking at the EV sales, they aren't where the forecasts have put them, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And the growth is there, but it's a more muted growth compared to forecasts. And that in a part is due to how much people are willing to pay for it. And so that's where I'm a little bit more cautious, and I'd say that they're not always willing to pay more for it. But that's where then those regulations come in, and that's where, at the moment, the car companies who are facing these huge fines, they can be looking at either buying credits or paying fines, or bringing down the cost of the price of those cars in order to boost sales.
I think you're saying that's probably a myth then, or at least that the strategy shouldn't be based on that assumption.
Yeah, no, that's it. We can't base a strategy on the assumption that, we'll just make it more sustainable, people will pay a price premium for it. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sustainability is primarily about reducing emissions.
That is true only from a point of view of simplification. It's just a way of making it a little bit more digestible to people. But in actual reality, it is so much more than that. There's just a myriad of other elements, resource depletion, biodiversity. And then this is only in the E elements of ESG. And then there's the social and the government. So, governance. So it's really much, much bigger. Yes. But
I guess it's an easy metric to focus on for now to get people aligned behind. You can't set 10 different goals and say we're working towards all these. Let's focus on one to get the ball rolling, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. This one's interesting because you've mentioned this a few times, or something related to this. Achieving net zero is impossible without government intervention and incentives.
I think this is true. I think that's true, because corporations are there to maximize profits. And so I think expecting them to then do something that's not necessarily in line with that, I just think that they need these incentives. And so by bringing in regulation, there's then a financial incentive, because that's the element that corporations understand, is the financial incentives. And as a result, if we are then able to bring in the financial incentives through regulations, then all of a sudden they'll make that work.
Okay, so do you see those as a kind of a temporary incentive to get to the point where the switch is made that are then tapered off?
Exactly. Once the transition is done, then it all aligns, and then from then on it's great. It all really comes down to those key transitions, and that, energy transition, circular economy, and the changes are need to be done. And it then comes down to simple change management, but that's where incentives are needed. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Last one then of these myths or truths. So recycling alone is enough to make a manufacturing process sustainable?
That's not true, because rather than just recycling, it really comes down to doing a full life cycle assessment, and making sure that, understanding where the hotspots are in terms of emissions. But when it comes to manufacturing, it's other than just recycling and other than just materials, it's also the emissions that are coming from all sorts of other activities, as well as a myriad of different things. PFAS, forever materials, release of those, treatment of those, water. Yes, all part of it.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of questions to kind of summarize what we got to today. The first, so you've mentioned a couple of times the key kind of stages of the halfway to the 2040 target a couple of times. So how do you see the trends of, sustainability within manufacturing changing over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, as we approach some of those deadlines?
I would say that the overall focus is going to intensify, because of what we've talked about before with CBAM, with the carbon credits. I think that element of making sure that the carbon as a number is embedded everywhere in the organization is going to be almost as important as looking at a regular cost accounting. So and the two going together, looking at any activity and any material on your bill of materials, whatever it is, having a euro amount or pound amount behind it, and having a carbon figure behind it. I think that's where it's heading.
So do you think it's potentially going to get easier, that it just becomes, once that kind of speed bump is overcome of getting the new initiatives started off and the new targets in place, you think once that's done, it will just become more of a routine kind of business activity of just doing the, business as usual, working towards that tactic?
I hope so. Yes, that's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, that sounds like a good picture of the future. It does. Okay, one quick one finally then. What do you think one simple step is that manufacturers could take today to start on the journey of making their processes more sustainable?
I would say one simple step. In the early stages, I would really focus in on what are the quick wins, and really start with energy efficiencies when it comes to manufacturers. And beyond that, looking at what are the top hotspots in terms of emissions, and then really looking at what are your top 3 levers, and what are your top 3 components, subcomponents, and then really focusing on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Esther. That sounds like a really good strategy. That's been really kind of fascinating to dig into this, into this about sustainability, about you. Thank you for coming onto the show. How can people find out more about you, Esther?
LinkedIn, I think that's a great place to connect. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. There's all sorts of different organizations and different associations that I'm then member of, and having these discussions really helps. So I'm looking forward to connecting with anyone.
Okay, thank you. We'll drop a link to your LinkedIn profile in the episode description. So yeah, really appreciated that, Esther. That was a really fun kind of exploration of sustainability. Thanks very much for that. Take care.
Thank you so much, Martin. Great to speak to you.
So if you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues. And please don't forget to subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, or give us a follow if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in our next episode.